this is where I talk a little shit, so I don't want anyone to make find this offensive maybe, but like it probably will no matter what, because it happens. Um, the self-love movement that happens 5-10 years ago, or love yourself in any weight. And then it's like, well, nowadays, all these people that were preaching that are all fucking taking Ozempic. All right, what's up, everybody? Pursuit of Balance. We're going to talk about GLPs. An episode I kind of been holding on to for probably a few months now, because it's just been a conversation that's obviously pretty mainstream at this point. And, in the gym, it's something that's, I don't know if it's necessarily talked about a lot, but it's definitely, it's talked about quietly or privately between people, but you definitely can see and tell how many people are actually utilizing these drugs. So, I'm actually going to do another episode with this guy that, I ran some peptides about 6 months ago myself. Well, maybe about 4 months ago at this time, whatever it was. And, peptides, like GLPs are a form of peptides, right? It's glucagon-like peptide. And it's basically, glucagon, for those that don't know, is kind of the inverse hormone of what insulin is, right? So like we get a lot of release of glucagon. It's basically our body's signal that we release this from the pancreas to tell our body to mobilize for fuel, right? So it helps us burn some fat when, times of low blood sugar, you're fasting, low carb, low calorie, high protein meals, exercise, all these things trigger it, which obviously we're going to talk about a lot today. And I really want to take a very open-minded and pragmatic approach to this because there's a lot of this data and information that I'm still unknown about. And this is kind of what I was just mentioning, that I would like to bring this guy that he owns BBS Wellness down in Santa Clara, and he's a lot more educated in the space, right? So I actually want to have him on as a guest so we can get into a little bit more of a lot more of a granular talk about this. But I want to kind of just speak from my point of view as a gym owner, as a trainer. Obviously seen conversations. I've seen friends on the drugs. I've seen clients on it. And some people I think are open about it. Some people are not open about it. But for the most part, it's pretty easy to tell who is and isn't on it. And I really want to steer the conversation around, if you are deciding to make that decision, nothing wrong with it. But these are the things that you should be doing and understanding as far as side effects, short-term, long-term, some of the stuff that we don't know. Things that you can do to kind of bridge the gap between once you're on to getting off, and the habits that need to be built, and maybe even hopefully talking some people off that are on the fence of should I go this route and take a more natural approach, quote unquote, or holistic approach to this without the drugs, or should I do this for a time period and whatever that might be. So, this was a conversation I was just having with one of my PT clients, and he had, fasting insulin was a little high, fasting glucose a little high, triglycerides, cholesterol, kind of showing signs of some insulin resistance based off the blood work. And his doctor just immediately was like, oh, let's put you on a GLP, right? And I was having a conversation with him and his wife, and I was like, hey, all the stuff that you're going to need to do anyways to be on it is stuff that I kind of been pushing you to do a little bit already, right? Not a little bit, a lot of it. So instead of just immediately jumping there, how about we try to go through a phase where we take these things a little bit more serious and then retest, go through blood work again, and then just let's see the difference, right? And if you don't see a dramatic difference doing those things, then I'm open to the approach, right? And I want to be very clear that I am not necessarily against it. A lot of people, I think they're like, oh, it's the drugs, it's a shortcut. But I understand it. I always tell this story that when I was younger, I was 18 years old probably at this time. I worked at Gilroy Health and Fitness, and we had a supplement shop inside. And one of the guys that worked there, he's like, man, you're so lean and you're so cut. He's like, I just need to put some size on you. So I kind of started working with him in diet. And he was the one that got me on my first cycle of anabolics, which I would definitely not suggest anybody doing, because that's a lot harder, and that's going to be a synthetic version versus things like now peptides, which are, peptides are just short chain amino acids, and it's things that your body naturally produces, right? So we're basically enhancing the natural production of some of these things. So as far as some of the longevity and the health side, I am way more pro-peptide and open to that conversation. And like I said, 4 or 5 months ago, I did some myself. I ran, a Clo blend, which is going to be more for inflammation, joint health, healing, pain management, inflammation type of thing. I did some tests at ipamorelin, which is more of a growth hormone, supposed to help a little bit with sleep, helps with some muscle building, reducing visceral fat. And then I also ran some glutathione, technically kind of not a peptide. You guys see glutathione and NAD and IV bags and drips and things like that. So I did that more for just health and longevity kind of purposes. And I ran that for 8 weeks. I didn't run it super long. I just wanted to kind of test and see how it felt. And Overall, I was kind of like mixed reviews. I think there's some things, and I don't want to get too deep into the peptide talk because I want to focus more on the GLP side, but I want to come back to it in summertime. And this is something that, like, the more research, the more I do research on it, I'm like, okay, I think this is something that can be a part of the longevity protocol, right? And for some people, you're going to use supplements, drugs, whatever it might be, to reduce weight or reduce fat. Some of you might be doing it to put muscle on. Some of it might be doing to improve sleep or reduce inflammation or improve pain management, whatever it might be. So a GLP-1 is still a peptide by definition, right? Because like your pancreas is releasing glucagon, right? So it's kind of mimicking that same action in the body. And obviously what it's doing is it's helping, suppress appetite. It's going to reduce the gastric emptying. A lot of the things that I think was interesting, this is some of the stuff that I'll talk about in the side effects too, is just kind of some of the signal between the parts of the brain that are signaling the dopamine side of things, right? So even the urge to have food, or some of the cool things that we're seeing with reduction in alcohol consumption and nicotine and drugs for some people, and obviously some of the side effects that I'll talk about maybe on the kind of the love and hormone side of it too. But it obviously is a very powerful thing that works really, really well for a lot of people, right? So to jump right into it, I think why it's so powerful is because just the extreme level of weight loss that you can see, right? And it can be, I think, too extreme for some people, but for the most part, it's obviously super, super effective for what it does, right? And when you think about what it's designed for, it's for weight management. It was designed, I'm pretty sure it started off, GLP started off in like kind of the blood sugar management side of the conversation first, but with the blood sugar management from glucagon itself and the weight management and just the desire for food and that necessarily kind of that part of the brain kind of being, in a sense, suppressed as well. That's obviously we're getting a lot of the benefits from it, right? But the conversation that I want to have today is like, well, what are we needing to do if you are on it or wanting to go on it in order to prevent some of the side effects as well, right? So when you think about kind of the jumping in the side effects first, I think the first thing that comes part of the conversation is the lean body mass that's lost, right? From what I researched and looked up, it's, I see some showing 20 to 25%. I see some showing 40 to 50%. And what I mean by that percentage is out of the weight that people are losing, they're also losing muscle tissue. They're losing lean tissue. And to be transparent, in any weight loss journey, in any calorie restriction environment that you're going to put your body into, there's going to be, especially for those that are not as metabolically flexible, there's going to be lean body mass loss, right? So you're going to lose that no matter what. So I don't want there to be a fear that like, okay, GLP is the reason why it's so bad versus just the holistic natural way of losing weight. It's like, no, you're going to do that too. Obviously on other forms in the more natural holistic way, there's ways for us to mitigate the amount of loss that comes from the lean body mass, right? And we'll talk about that obviously with this as well with the drugs. So that's a big one. I think the lean body mass, because the one thing you guys got to remember is your muscle is your metabolic machinery that keeps your body insulin sensitive, that helps you regulate blood sugar, helps you regulate a lot of things metabolically. Your BMR is based off the amount of lean body tissue that you have, right? So the more lean tissue an individual has, the higher their resting metabolic rate will be, which is what we want, right? We want to be insulin sensitive. We obviously want to be able to regulate blood sugar very well, and we want to be metabolically active, right? And especially at rest, right? The metabolic flexibility that you heard me touch on a couple times already, that is the ability for your body to kind of switch between two substrates, right? Can I use glucose and glycogen and carbs, or can I also use fat and fatty acid that's stored, right? When you think about weight loss for most individuals, and most people listening to this and most people in the gym that I work with, it's like, yeah, weight loss is a big part of their goal. But I will be clear that naturally most of us are talking about fat loss, right? So weight loss is obviously a component of it, but the composition of the weight that we're trying to focus on is we're trying to lose fat. We're not trying to lose muscle. The goal is not to look skinny fat, right? And this is kind of where they call it like the Ozempic face. And this is where you can tell with the GLPs like so quickly. Like I'm like, okay, that person is definitely running some type of GLP. Because you can just see the amount of how fast the reduction of body weight is and fat reduction, but then also like the eyes look a little sunken in, and like, I was making a joke the other day. I was like, we used to call this the LA girl diet back in the day, like the cocaine and cigarettes kept all the LA girls pretty skinny, but like, it's a very similar look, right? Like how the face gets sunken in because you're losing tissue everywhere, right? So with that, like the goal is like, okay, what are some of the mitigation things that we can do, right? So the lean body tissue is the first thing that I want to bring up because I think this is one of the most important things that people should be focusing on when I talk about the mitigation strategies of how do I prevent some of the quote unquote side effects or negative effects of what these drugs can produce, right? Second thing, which is a huge one long term, and obviously there's not long term studies on this, but like this is one of my fears down the road is the reduction in bone density. And more importantly, the fact that like the bone density, like think about it this way. When your body's losing weight, when your body's losing muscle, and obviously then the mechanical tension that it would produce on bones, right? Because when you think about how how is bone density improved, generally it's like a load. So it's like if I'm a heavier individual, like my body is obviously forced to adapt to the weight, right? If I'm someone that lifts weights or exercise or plays sports or has anything that has any type of mechanical tension on muscles and tendons and ligaments and bones, the adaptation is increasing bone density. So this is why, especially for older individuals, especially for female clients, that avoiding the osteoporosis side of things, and just in general, and not even outside the drug too, this is why resistance training is so important, because that is going to be one of those things that will trigger the adaptation to improve the bone density. So then this way, we're not that old person that falls down and has a fractured hip, and then that obviously immobilizes us for life and becomes detrimental. So the goal is obviously we want to have muscle tissue. We want to have good bone density. But that is also the second side effect that I think really kind of pops out is like the bone density reduction that happens, right? So it's like, okay, what are the other things that we need to kind of think about in order to kind of with those side effects? The third one, which is, I'm not doing these in any particular order. I think the first two kind of in mind and like in probably a more priority order. But the third one for me is some of the kind of food restrictions. Like if you're someone that's ever struggled with disordered eating to any degree, I think this could be something that could be a very dangerous rabbit hole for people, because you got to remember, like the drug itself, the GLP itself, is reducing the desire. It's reducing your appetite. And even for those that I know personally around me that are on it, like even when they are eating, they're not able to eat a lot, right? Because it's slowing the emptying of the stomach too, right? So you just get full fast, which is what makes the drug work, obviously, or one of the things that makes the drug very successful for what it's trying to solve for. But if you're someone that struggled with disordered eating, I mean, think about it, right? Like if you're on a drug that doesn't make you hungry and you're eating 800 or 1200 or 1500 calories as a grown adult or someone that's even active, like that is going to lead to even more negative effects, right? And that's the thing that I think is interesting that maybe I don't even fully understand is like how many of these things are a direct response from the drug itself versus a byproduct of what the drug is doing that's causing, right? And when I think about the bone density, like obviously that could be in relationship to that, right? If I think about the disordered eating, that's definitely in relationship to that. Like the muscle, for example, the muscle loss is a direct effect on what the body is actually going through from taking the drug and the GLP. So that's a big one, right? Obviously disordered eating, for anybody that is struggling with that or has ever struggled with that, this is definitely not something I would be promoting, because it's just going to enhance kind of maybe more anxiety around food itself, right? Because now on the other side, the pro of it is like if you are someone that's always feel like you're handcuffed to food, because a lot of times when you hear this statement of like, oh, it's just like the lazy way out, I'm like, well, like at the end of the day, you got to remember this, like the body's natural desire unconsciously is efficiency, right? It is wanting to be lazy. It's wanting to find convenience. And nowadays, with how the food system is set up, with the quality of the food and the farming and agriculture practices that we have, access to DoorDash, access to food with work, we're set up in a very different environment. So like, of course, I'm always going to preach like the more holistic, natural way is always going to be the way. But I also can understand why someone would lean towards, okay, is there a route that can get me there faster? Or is there a route that can get me there without so much friction, right? Because a lot of times you'll see people start a diet or begin a type of like dieting phase for some people or training, and then like they have a hard time getting over that initial hump of developing the habit, right? Which is the hardest part for anybody. This makes it a lot fucking easier for people because like it's forcing that habit. So that's one. The fourth one, which I think was kind of interesting, and I'll kind of talk more about the pros. There's some cool stuff that's coming out that you're seeing people that also have a reduction in alcohol consumption, a reduction in, any addictive things, right? Because when you think about drugs, you think about nicotine for people, you think about alcohol, you think about maybe doom scrolling. Now, this is kind of interesting on the other side when you think about like love, right? And what I mean by that is like there's been some stuff that's been talked about that I've like listened to on podcasts where like the parts of our brain that signal love, because love is a desire, right? Which is in a sense a indirect relationship to dopamine as well, right? Because like we are craving the chase, right? Dopamine is kind of what most of us think about as like that motivation thing, the motivation hormone, I'm sorry. So when your body is releasing dopamine, right, this is generally happening in times of pursuits, right? Because when I'm working towards something, when I'm making the climb to the top of the mountain, you're not getting the biggest dopamine rush necessarily on the peak of the climb. You're getting it on the hike itself, right? And I use that as kind of an analogy for like how it's used for all aspects of life. Now, there's a suppression that happens from these GLPs that I think is interesting because like, cool, pro if you're someone that is struggling with maybe alcoholism, or if you're struggling with drugs, or if you're struggling with any type of addictive personality. Those could be things that I think could be obviously a benefit for people. Now, on the other side of it, when you think about like this desire for love, and I have, I have a person that I know, and we were talking about that. And I was talking about the podcast, and the husband was like, you know what, honestly, like I feel like the sexual desires kind of dropped a little bit for her as well since being on it. And I was like, okay, that's interesting. I wonder if that's in relationship to hormones or not. And I kind of like started doing research on it. And like, for some people, there's actually an improvement in their hormone and their lipid profile, right? And the reason why is because like with weight loss, you might become more insulin sensitive, and that might also enhance testosterone or whatever, obviously depending on male, female, whatever hormones we're talking about. But for some people on the dopamine side of it, what we're talking about, that could be a negative thing, right? Because this idea of having desire between you and your partner, or this craving that we're looking for, if you have a reduction on that, like that for me, when I think about, okay, short-term and long-term, like what is that going to do to people in their relationships, right? Like, how is that going to affect them? Is that going to be something that's going to be a negative effect? Or also, what are the changes that happen when they get off, right? There's some interesting stuff. This is kind of a tangent, but like you even see some of the stuff with like birth control, like how women, when they're on birth control, have a certain connection with their partner. And then when they get off birth control, they lose that, right? And there's something with the signaling that happens when on birth control versus off. And I kind of, that popped up in my head when I was doing some of the research for this stuff of like, I wonder if that's going to have any type of effects. Like, I think the difference is like, if someone's on birth control their whole life and then they get off during, in a relationship and it changes something for a negative way, obviously a negative impact. GLP, like some people are running this for 3 months, 6 months, 12 months. But how they get off is obviously going to be important too. So those are some of the things that I think like pop up in my head as far as like the side effects, right? So my big thing, and I want to give you guys some value, is like, what are the things that we can do to mitigate these things? How can we prevent some of these side effects from happening? And this is going to be taken two ways, because this is going to be a great mitigation strategy for those that are on it. But this also might be the strategy that just fixes your problem without even necessarily needing to go on the drug. So the first thing and foremost is resistance training. You need to have resistance training all times of life, but especially on this drug, right? And the reason why is because that reduction in lean body mass that's going to happen during this weight loss event is we need to mitigate that. And how do we mitigate that? Well, it's like building muscle and resistance training and signaling to the body that adaptation for building muscle is important for us. Because where I really, really fear some of these people getting in trouble that are on it are the ones that do not have the habit of being in a gym, do not have the habit of some of the things I'm going to talk about in these different strategies. Because now the big mistake that's going to happen is you're going to see a huge reduction in calories, right? Like borderline what, we used to call the starvation mode for some of us, just because it's extreme caloric restrictions. And use the Biggest Losers show, right? Like when they all got off and how they all rebounded and gained more weight than they started, and how they ruined their metabolic rate and their metabolism because of these extreme deficits. Because when your body goes through an extreme deficit of any sort, naturally or unnaturally, your body's going to go through an adaptation, right? And the adaptation is, well, let's conserve energy because we're fucking losing a lot of weight. We're burning a lot of energy. We're eating too little calories. So I'm going to reduce my non-exercise activity thermogenesis. I'm going to reduce my BMR by losing some of that lean body mass. So you're going to see this reduction in caloric burn and energy expenditure, which is not something we want to see, right? Now, it's okay because in periods of diet cycles or someone that's maybe in a little bit of a calorie restriction, that's normal. But this is why diet breaks and cheat days and, having some caloric maintenance or even caloric surplus, depending on kind of your current situation of activity or training, is important, because we can, once again, mitigate the drop that would naturally happen from that. So first things first, like I said, for the bone density side, for the lean body mass side, like we want to keep the resistance training high at an absolute minimum 3 times a week. But ideally, I think the magic number is kind of closer to 4 for me personally for clients. So that would be like the number one and the most important thing. The second thing is like you need to remember that What glucagon does naturally without the drug is the things that you also need to be doing to just prevent these things from happening in a natural state when you're off the drug. Or if you're someone listening to this that's on the fence or not doing it at all, is protein dense meals, right? Getting enough protein at a minimum 0.7 of your total body weight, right? Maybe for some of us closer to 1 gram per pound of body weight, but like at a minimum 0.7. It could be a little bit lower for females just because they naturally hold a little bit more fat and less lean body mass than a male. But that definitely needs to be the biggest priority. Now, what we see as a trap for some people is the fact that because the appetite suppression is so strong that most people are not even eating enough calories, which is good in a weight loss perspective. But obviously, if your calories are that low, there's no way in fucking hell you're even getting close to the protein intake number that you need. So that's where I think it's kind of a double-edged sword, is like, you need to need enough protein to mitigate it, but you also don't have the appetite to fulfill that need, right? And that's where I think it can be troublesome, because it's like, well, okay, I need enough protein to make sure that this drug doesn't have too many negative effects. But also, I feel sick to my stomach, right? And that's also kind of another one of those side effects that I kind of read into, is like some people dealing with some level of anxiety and depression because of the dopamine side of that. Some people also dealing with nausea and headaches and, some of the typical side effects that we see with any drug. But yeah, so the protein side of it, I think, is just the biggest one. So like, obviously, if you're not on it, this is always going to be my biggest thing, as most people undereat on protein. I heard somebody say last week, that they're like, some people, I think, like over prioritize protein. And I'm like, I don't think you can over prioritize protein, because I've been talking about it my whole life. Like I grew up with parents that understood the aspect that like, just eat meats. If you eat a lot of meat, you're going to eat protein. It's leaner calories. They didn't even understand the science. They just knew it worked. And now it's funny because it somewhat feels mainstream nowadays for everyone to be talking about protein, because big food is putting protein labels on every fucking thing that we have. It doesn't matter if it's food, if it's solid, if it's liquid, like everything's protein, right? But I like the transition, because I think so many people have just prioritized more processed foods that just hold a lot more sugars and carbs and fats, and people are undereating on fiber and undereating on protein. So the protein for sure is something I think needs to be just the priority on top of the resistance training, right? But the other aspect of it is like, if you are someone, like I'm going to use kind of my client that I mentioned, is like that's maybe dealing with some blood work or maybe dealing with some level of insulin resistance. Like in this client that I'm talking about, like he doesn't have a lot of weight to lose, right? So like he's been really consistent with his training and his programming. He's a little bit more motivated now, which is great. But I also think like it's just like, hey, like let's try to go maybe 3 months of just being a little bit more intense with the stuff that we could do holistically. And then let's see, do those biomarkers improve at all or dramatically or just a little bit, and or whatever, or they go backwards, who knows? That obviously, if you're doing it correctly, should never be the case, because that's just a way for us to kind of build in longevity and not deal with possible side effects that can come along with it. Because like, think about it, how many side effects do we have from resistance training? Well, increased chance of injury maybe from exercise, maybe overtraining for some of us that are doing it that way. How many side effects do we have from eating protein? This is why the conversation for me, I thought was a little weird when someone said like over prioritizing it. It's like, well, not really. I think majority of people, 90+% of people I work with, are under eating protein relative to the goal, relative to the calorie composition of total calorie intake. So like, I don't know if I know anybody that's overeating a protein. Like when I was in the bodybuilding world, yes, like that was like something that I think was like, okay, was probably that gonna be over prioritized, because we were eating like a gram or gram and a half. Some people I knew that were trying to get like all closer to 2 grams of protein per pound. That's insane. Like you do not need that much protein. Like one I would say is kind of like maybe 1.2 is the absolute ceiling to like what someone would ever need to get into. But that would be even more extreme cases. I think for most of us, it's like 0.7 for a female, 0.6 maybe at an absolute minimum. The RDA for protein intake is ridiculous. It's like 0.4, I think, or something like that. But I think for like most of us, it's like, hey, if we can get like 0.7 or 0.8, solid, right? Like for me and my total calories, like 25% of my calories need to come from protein. But based off my caloric need, 25% is close to 200 grams of protein for me. So my training days, I'm technically eating a little bit more protein, honestly, than my total body weight. Like I'm 195 maybe. And, like when I did the Pinoy, which I talked about a few episodes ago, it was like, that was one of the big things that popped up. So, like I said, I really wanted to kind of tie the stuff in of like the mitigation side of it. Of like, I'm not against, for me, I'm a degenerate in a lot of things, right? So for me, like out of all people, it's going to be very open-minded about taking a drug or a peptide or something to have fun or enhance their life or be better. Ideally, yes, as I've gotten older, it's getting much easier for me. Like, I'll give you, like I told you the story at the beginning. It's like I ran a couple steroid cycles in my late teens and early 20s getting ready for men's physique shows because I was super skinny. And, and I like the why I bring this up twice now is like I was insecure about my body weight. I was insecure that I felt small. I was always this super skinny kid. So for me, I was like, fuck yeah. Like if I could take something that's going to make me better. Now, guess what? I dealt with a lot of side effects, right? This is why I'll never do that stuff again. Like maybe down the road, if there's things that come in, like, you see this testosterone replacement therapy or HRT, TRT, and you see a lot of older gentlemen doing it because of the testosterone suppression that's just happened over the last few decades. You're like, there's a degree that I'm maybe open to like a very, very small microdose under a very controlled environment later in life. But like right now, it's like, hey, if you are eating correctly, you're sleeping well, you're managing all the other things, like you shouldn't be dealing with this stuff to need it. But I understand the core emotional attachment and feeling towards it because like it is an insecurity for people. Like, and this is where I talk a little shit. So I don't want anyone to make find this offensive maybe, but like it probably will no matter what, because that happens. The self-love movement that happens 5-10 years ago, or love yourself in any weight. And then it's like, well, nowadays, all these people that were preaching that are all fucking taking Ozempic. So it's like, clearly it was an insecurity, but like we were just talking ourselves off the emotional cliff of like, it's okay to be whatever you want. So I'm okay with that no matter what. Love yourself whoever you are, but like understand the progress drives motivation. Progress drives, happiness for us as humans. That's how we are hardwired. We want to see something moving the right direction. So when something can move the right direction and quote unquote feel like a shortcut or less work or less friction, yeah, I understand the attraction to it. I just want people to be mindful that it comes with side effects, right? Anything's going to come with side effects. Like I drink too much to be considered healthy to a doctor. I have red wine every night, right? And it's like when people hear that, they're like, wait, you drink every night? I'm like, every night. I have red wine with dinner every night. So I drink more than what is the status quo of what we would consider healthy. I understand it comes with side effects, right? Like I understand that it's kind of ruining my quality of my sleep a little bit. That maybe it's reducing my my ability to burn fat as efficiently or build muscle as efficiently. So like I understand that, but for me, it's like I enjoy it, and it's not something that is like I do my blood work. I'm healthy. I work out like 5-6 times a week. I eat correctly. I meal prep, but I have flex. So I can kind of put that in the same category for some people that are thinking about this or currently on this, that like, I understand it. Just be mindful that like all things in life have cycles, and it's important to cycle on and cycle off of everything. Because I think separation is great for the mental and emotional attachment side of things, and also not creating a dependence, but also just the efficacy and how the drug works. And how things work, right? Like when I go on vacation, I don't bring supplements with me. I take time off, right? Like I think so there's an important like kind of balancing act between that. So the big thing that I would really say is like if you are on it or doing it, do as much as you can to enhance the foundation of what you need to be doing, what the resistance training, the diet, the sleep, all the other things, so you can like minimize the side effects of it. Because the one thing I will tell you from my own experience is when I have run peptides or, over 12 years ago when I ran like a cycle for testosterone for shows, like it enhanced my motivation because I was like, fuck, I'm already paying a lot of money for this shit. So I want it to work, right? So I do see that as also another kind of quote unquote benefit for people is like, maybe it's the trigger to have someone take it. I have no idea what it cost. Like when I was going through all the research for it, it was like people were saying like $800 a month. Like, I don't know if that's out of pocket. I would assume that's out of pocket. So it's not the cheapest thing in the world, right? For some people. So there's definitely, that's going to be a byproduct of just motivation that people are going to be like, well, fuck, like I don't take this serious because I don't want to waste my money and I don't want to like ruin the drug or create longer term negative effects. No one goes into it with the intention of knowing a side effect and negative effect and just being okay with it. But I will say most people just won't have the discipline or the motivation to create the foundational habits that are needed to prevent that from happening. And that's my fear, right? Like that's my fear for some people, that it's just like taking it, it's losing weight without even trying, without even thinking about it. I'm losing all this weight. And then I get off. And then what is going to be the rebound effect for all these people, right? And when you metabolically suppress yourself to that degree, you have to understand that the rebound is going to be gnarly, right? Like you are going to put a lot of weight on, and the weight that you're going to put back on is not that lean tissue, right? The bone density is also not going to increase if you're not really doing the resistance training side of it. So you're going to put a lot more fat on. So let's say you lose 40 pounds and 20 to 50% of that is lean tissue, you might put 40 pounds back on if you never change your lifestyle, and that all might be fat. So now you want 2 steps forward to go 5 steps backwards, right? And like that is something that I would be like, if you know you're that person, like personality, like I'd much rather somebody invest on a nutritionist or, a trainer, or do something that's going to hold them to the level of accountability that maybe the drug can do, or maybe some of the effects can do, and just understand that patience is a virtue. Like it's the thing that's going to solve most people's problems. Is it's not wanting everything tomorrow, right? And like the correct, if I can correct myself in that statement, we all want everything tomorrow, but it's being okay with something taking a lot longer than we think because it's a part of the lifestyle. I put lifestyles in my business name for this reason because I preach it so hard. It's like it needs to be sustainable by being built into your lifestyle. And a lifestyle is a habit. If it's not a habit, it's not a part of your lifestyle. It's just a temporary thing. It's a short-term diet. It's a short-term training thing. It's a short-term job, short-term relationship. If you want to have something work forever, you have to think about forever, right? You have to think about how can I do this sustainably? And the only way to make it sustainable is, well, it has to be fun. It has to have progress. And I have to just be okay with always being obsessed with the process necessarily versus the goal, right? I think that's enough rambling and yapping for me on that subject. So like I said, I hope in the near future that I will bring somebody on that understands this at a much higher level than I do. But I hope that you guys can take that with a grain of salt of understanding that, like, hey, it's around, it's popular. There's a lot of people that maybe even listening to this that are currently on it. Don't feel shame. Don't feel embarrassed by it. Just understand that these side effects require mitigation strategies, and you need to make that a huge priority when you're on it. And if you're not on it or you're thinking about doing it, all the stuff that I gave you for mitigation strategies, or the handful of things, it's not much, those are things you should be doing all the time. Right? Like just do that all the time. Always prioritize your protein. Always prioritize resistance training and some aerobic cardiovascular health, right? Always prioritize your sleep and your stress management, all the things that are going to make you a happy, healthy human, because those are the things that just make us well-rounded. And that's what holistic health is about, right? All right, guys. Well, I will see you next week as always. And if you found that this was valuable, share it with somebody. Thank you.